Our next talk is by Tim Hirsch, who's the Deputy Director at GBIF, and is going to talk about NBN as a global player enabling biodiversity research through GBIF.
Thank you very much indeed. Just wait for...
You should just be able to turn... Is that it? Oh, there we are. Just use that button there to forward.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me personally to be here in Cardiff. In a previous incarnation, I was actually a journalist, first on the Western Mail and then for BBC Wales, so this is something of a homecoming for me, and it's terrific to be at this very inspiring meeting. And I don't think I can follow the poetry of the last talk, but I'll do my best. Just a quick word about the title slide here, apart from something strange has happened with the formatting. But what I really wanted to show with this map is if you look at the view of the UK in that zooming in on the data shared through GBIF, I think tells its own story. It is literally, it's a beacon of light in terms of the volume and quality of data that is coming from your network and from providers in the UK is an absolute example which is very clear when you look at those maps. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit over the next few minutes is looking a little bit beyond perhaps the everyday conversation and a lot of the discussions that happen within this network about the issues within the UK itself, and just look at the context of the data you're dealing with in terms of the global effort to provide free and open access to biodiversity data. So just a quick look at the new GBIF website. We moved onto this platform back in August, and there are a number of improvements I won't go through here, but perhaps the one I would most I would emphasize is just this universal search box here, which seems a very obvious thing, but in the previous versions of gbif.org, if you went to the home page and you put a species name into that search box, you wouldn't have got anything useful. There is now a completely integrated search facility so that you can find any type of the resources just from that central search, whether it's a species, whether it's a data set, whether it's information resource. The other thing is that, amazingly, in our previous version, you could go all the way down the home page and not see a single image of anything alive, which naturally people thought was a bit strange. So we're making much more use now of the huge variety of images that are shared alongside many of the specimens and the observations that go into GBIF, but up until now we have not made great use of. You'll see the numbers there, lots of big numbers in terms of the total number of records. So we are edging fairly quickly towards the billion species occurrence records that are being shared from around the world through GBIF, and we might reach that fairly soon. I would say it's a cert that it will happen within the next year, and could be considerably sooner than that. And that's coming together from over 35,000 data sets, over 1,000 institutions from around the world. And another big number just to look at is this 60 billion records there, and that's the total number of records that are being requested by users just in a single month. Now, it's a big number. It doesn't mean all that much, but it's a reflection of the kind of processing power that needs to go into the delivery of that data to our users around the world. So, looking at how the effort from different parts of the world in terms of sharing data through GBIF, this is just looking at the effort over the last year, and in terms of new records, you can see the UK is right at the top there, and I'll show you in a second the context of that. So right in terms of recent effort, the UK has been an absolute world leader of sharing and making freely available its the data for use in research and policy. Looking at the total number of records currently available in GBIF. So that's, in effect, it's cumulative, but it's everything that's now in the index and that you can retrieve. UK, as was mentioned a couple of times yesterday, is number 2 behind the United States there. But in fact, if you took just one data set out of the US count, which is the eBird observational data set, that's about 275 million. And I did a quick calculation just before this talk, and the US then would just about pip the UK at 76 million. So the UK is very close to being the largest share of records if you exclude that very large single network. Looking at the progress over time, so there's just a graph showing from 2008, when we first started indexing records globally, the progression just in terms of numbers of occurrences. You can see it's been a steady increase. I would just point you towards this little kink here. It goes down and it goes up again. What that represents is the moment where, after much debate and lots of controversy, GBIF decided to insist on machine-readable standard licenses for all data coming in to GBIF. When that was first decided on, there were predictions that GBIF would lose a significant proportion of its data from publishers who weren't prepared to accept those licensing conditions. As you can see, we did lose a little bit, but since then it's more than been made up with new records, and indeed some of those records that were originally withdrawn coming back. So I would just emphasize that. If you then look at the equivalent trend for the UK, it's a bit more bumpy, as you can see, but it's a great story in the long run. There was a period where we had relatively flat adding of records to GBIF. There was a huge nosedive there, which was the point at which really all of the NBN data was reorganized in preparation for the Atlas. And then, of course, it didn't just come back, but zoomed right up to where it is now, with that newly established data pipeline in place. So that's a tremendous story for us. One of the things I really wanted to concentrate in this talk is to look at the ways in which we're starting to get better in being able to reflect back to all of those involved in sharing and publishing data, why that data is useful, or one aspect of why that data is useful, and that's to say how the availability of that data is being picked up and used in research. For some time we've been tracking the literature as best we can to look for examples of where GBIF is being cited as a source of data in research, and those are the numbers year by year of how many peer-reviewed papers we pick up that in some way have made use of GBIF. And as Paula mentioned yesterday, we compile that into an annual science review. There have been a few copies around, but all of that information is anyway online if you look under resources and click under data use or literature. And you can see from there that it's steadily going up. We're not quite at the end of, we're not quite at the end of this year, but we expect it to go up to something like 700 peer-reviewed uses during 2017. Or to put it another way, every day at the moment, there's about 2 new papers are being published that are making use of data shared through GBIF. And if you look at one of the things that we do in the review and indeed on the website, is to categorize the areas, and in particular as policy-linked areas of science that this data informs. And a lot of it is what you would expect: conservation, threatened species, protected area research, etc. But a significant amount is areas that you perhaps wouldn't predict. Human health, the modelling of disease vectors, food security, the distribution of crop wild relatives, impacts of climate change. And one of the important messages that we really need to get across is that data collected and shared by networks interested in one particular aspect of species distribution are actually contributing to scientific study and indeed informed policy in many different areas. So it's reuse for purposes that may not have been predicted when that data is collected in the first place. Looking at how that research is distributed in terms of the location of where the author teams are, again, the UK is a world leader there, so the studies that in some way are making use of GBIF, the largest number are from the US, but the UK is a high second. So UK science is using and benefiting significantly from the availability of data shared through GBIF. If you go to the country pages on GBIF, we have a research list there where you can browse through the various papers that have cited with UK authors that have cited use of GBIF. So that's, you can't read it there, but that's 684 papers from UK institutions. And this isn't only peer-reviewed research. There's one interesting example at the top there. For example, there's a lovely new book of the world's owl species that has a great citation of GBIF, which they use to help to compile the distribution maps that they use for against each species. So that's looking at it one way. Looking at it the other way is how is the network here contributing to global research? One thing we've been able to do recently that we weren't able to do before is to link citations in research directly back to contributing data sets. And we can do that because we now provide DOIs, digital object identifiers, not just to each data set for citation, but also to each data download. So every time a researcher downloads a data set which results from a search which may include data from hundreds or even potentially thousands of different data sets around the world, there will be a single short string of letters and numbers that will always take you back to the original composition of that search result in terms of which of the institutions that have shared data. This is just starting to be used. It's been available for 2 or 3 years. We haven't particularly pushed it very strongly with the academic publishers. We're going to do now. But even so, we are able already to, through these citations, to start to make that direct link back from data sets to particular research outcomes. And this is just, we did a quick compilation, just taking the UK publishers to see from that small number of citations we have already, which are getting the largest numbers. And you'll see on the top left, probably too small to read there, but Natural History Museum is, as you might expect, in the front. Second, the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, then EMBL, Kew. But then I thought I'd just, to help illustrate this in the last few minutes, I would see which of the NBN members was getting the most citations in this slightly arbitrary random group of citations we have already. And in fact, it's the Suffolk Biodiversity Information Service. Is anyone from Suffolk here? Oh, they're not. Anyway, you can tell them later. So, as you'll see from these blocks here, we were able to detect through the citation system 16 peer-reviewed papers that were citing a download of data from GBIF that included at least some data from the Suffolk dataset. Right, so that's your starting point. So this is what the Suffolk, the Biodiversity Information Service page looks like And this, by the way, is what all of your pages look like if you've registered separately as publishers through NBN. So there's all of the description of the network, of the institution, location on the map. This is just one of the chosen selected map views of where the data is distributed in Suffolk. But really what I wanted to point to here is this little tab here. So this says 16 citations. So every data set that has at least one research citation associated with it, using this DOI, will have that button. So if you want to see examples of how your data, or data downloaded from your data set, is starting to, or has contributed to research, you can click on that. And so this is just the top bit of the list of those citations. What I've done is I've just ringed the DOI that has produced this association in each case. So these are DOIs that each of the authors of these research papers have used to cite the download that they took from GBIF. So I thought I would just select one of those. So it's actually this one here, which is a paper in the Journal of Hymenoptera relating to the distribution of a rare bee species. And there you see, this is what prompted the alert. Here's the DOI. It's actually in the acknowledgement sections of the paper, or the section of the paper, which is probably not what we would recommend, but anyway, at least they used it. And this DOI is what allows us then to look back and say, okay, which are the contributing data sets in GBIF that added up to the data used in that paper. This is what the map looks like. What this tells you here, and this is all freely available, is this is what they searched for. This was a straightforward search. They put in the name of the species, and they just filtered to make sure that it had a valid coordinate. And then this was actually what they retrieved in total from everything that had been published on that particular bee in GBIF. So you see there's a bunch in Scandinavia, very, very sparse number of records in Central Europe, and then look. And then this is what has contributed to that paper from your network. And this is also, again, if you click on any of the DOIs, you can sift through this and see exactly what contributed to each of these data downloads. So this, again, is looking at the same download, so it's records that we have in GBIF on that particular bee. The contributing data sets for that download were 13 different data sets. I've put arrows next to the ones that were actually NBN partners. So that of the total data that was available for that particular bee species throughout Europe, more than half of them were coming from NBN members. Now, that's where we are now with this. I think what we're able to demonstrate now is the potential and the capability of using this kind of linkage to report back in a much more effective way how data shared, published through GBIF is being used in research. What we would really like to do now, though, is to get much more feedback from providers, publishers of all kinds, and this covers museums around the world, but also very much networks like yours, is to look at the kind of metrics and the way that they're being displayed now, and to get feedback from the providers about, particularly as we package that up, what sort of reporting services we can give, what's the key information that you would really like to have that would best meet your needs. You can do that. There is a feedback button on every page. There's a little speech bubble in the top right corner of the website. I think for this, we'll probably do is to try and channel some of that feedback in the coming months through Joe in the NBN. But I really appreciate your views and thoughts about where we should go with this. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Very interesting talk. Are there any questions? We do have a couple of minutes.
Yes.
I am not embarrassed to ask a question which perhaps a lot of people in the room know the answer to, but could you just explain some of the reasons, or perhaps it's a question for Joe, some of the reasons why not all the records on the Atlas make their way to GBIF? What are the blockages to prevent the sort of full upload of Atlas records to GBIF?
It's up to the data provider to tell us if they want us to share it with GBIF. Some of the providers don't want us to. We have to ask them for the reason why.
That's the answer.
Oh yes, there's one.
I was just wondering what you're doing to encourage more countries to get data files on. You've got about a third of the way through the world list so far.
Sorry, to get more countries to be members. It's a constant process. There was, I guess, a core of members that came in the early days of GBIF, so it built out essentially from the OECD countries. We've made much more progress in some areas. We're doing, I think we're building membership, particularly in Africa, doing pretty well in Latin America. Asia is a big challenge. You know, I mean, we're constantly engaging through international networks. Often you can see bottom-up approaches being very effective. That's happening actually in Russia. It's interesting that although Russia is not a national member of GBIF, and I think you can guess that there are challenges in getting that political engagement. However, recently we had a native Russian scientific officer who came in, has built up a fantastic network of willing institutions in Russia who was already sharing records without having a formal network, and they've actually just passed the 1 million records mark. So it's not quite as bleak as it looks when you just look at the country membership, but it's a constant challenge, and I can only say we go through lots of different routes. But I would also say that the connections that institutions, for example, in the UK have with partners in other parts of the world can be extremely helpful in helping to build participation.
Okay. Yes, last question. David.
I can shout, guys. So I can see this is becoming increasingly important for tracking the impact of what we do. Many data sets are created through the contribution of many organisations or multiple organisations. Do you have any plans to enable citation of multiple organisations for single data sets to be able to reflect how they're generated?
It's a challenge that because our data model essentially has an exclusive relationship whereby you have a single publisher will publish a set number of data sets, so each data set has one route back to that publisher. And to get a standard citation, we kind of need to settle on that. Having said that, what we certainly encourage, and it's been a great example actually of the recent work with the NBN, is to try and make sure that publisher level is at the lowest appropriate level, so that when you have an aggregation of lots of different data sets, you make sure that you're crediting the providing institutions rather than making the aggregator the publisher, as used to happen with NBN actually. So I think the best we can do in that direction is to just advise, and people can split up data sets as they want, to make sure that the most appropriate attribution is given. But I think that's the approach to sort of for people to be aware of the model and where that credit is going to go when they decide how to divide up and split up the data, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, first, a round of applause, please, for this morning's speakers. And now it's tea time. So let's be back at 25 past 3, please.